Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don. And one of the things that I have is a digital media marketing business, and they are actually the sponsor of this show. This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by D3 Digital Media Marketing. Dive into the digital world with confidence and creativity on your side. D3 Digital Media Marketing is your all-in-one solution for making a lasting impact online. From the vibrant, engaging world of social media marketing, podcasts, and webinars to the strategic depths of website development, SEO, pay-per-click, email, and content marketing, we tailor our approach to fit your unique brand story. Let's elevate your presence, connect with your audience, and drive success together. Your digital journey starts here. Visit d3digitalmedia.com to learn more. So with that, let me bring in our guest. It's Paul Edwards. He's the president and CEO of DoseMe, and he's been a senior executive with Merck and GSK and startups including ILUM Health Solutions, Infectious Disease Connect, and TrackMy Solutions. So with that, welcome, Paul.
Hi, nice to be here, Donald.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And we were talking before the show got started. You're in warm Florida. I'm in somewhat cooler Colorado right now. It's like 50 degrees here. It keeps fluctuating between like the bottom of the 80s all the way back to winter time. So our temperatures really don't know what they're doing yet here.
Yeah, as I said, I think we're at about 90. And I think I might have said it in Celsius earlier when I said 30. You probably thought, it can't be 30 in Florida.
Yeah. No, mentally, I did think that it was probably a conversion. So yeah, Paul, would you mind just taking a little bit of time telling listeners just a little bit about yourself and your journey? What led you to DoseMe, and then also mostly what led you to life sciences?
Yeah, sure. I've been involved in the pharmaceutical industry effectively from when I left university. And how I fell into antibiotics specifically was more by chance. The very first company that I ever joined as a representative back then was selling macrolides. And that was my job. So, off I went and I sold macrolides and started to really sort of, with some trepidation, often understand more and more about the difficulties of, first of all, understanding the different types of antibiotics, and then the bacteria that they kill, from gram-positive to gram-negative. So really early on in my career, and then coming into Glaxo, again, very involved in the antibiotic world. And that's when I started to understand that the time that it takes for a physician to actually know what bacteria he's dealing with is really the problem, because you can throw as many antibiotics as you want from the first minute, but most of those antibiotics are causing some sort of damage because you don't know whether you're actually dealing with the bacteria. So that became almost a sort of life's mission, and every role that I took on, left Glaxo and went to Merck, and very quickly was involved in the hospital and specialty units within Merck, and they had a very strong infectious disease portfolio, and HIV, infectious disease, and hepatitis were the units that I took care of. But antibiotics was always the one that was the conundrum. You had these very powerful antibiotics that you knew you couldn't let everybody use. But at the same time, a physician, because he knew so little about what was happening with the patient, would obviously always choose that big gun antibiotic. And the company really struggled at the time, from within the discussions we were having was, how do we stop just everybody using carbapenems, which are just not indicated as a first-line therapy, but they were being used anyway. And the two things that happen there, obviously, the drug itself builds up resistance very quickly, so its lifespan as a product is reduced. Whereas if it's used correctly, the time that the many years of sales that you would get out of a carbapenem would be extended. So that was the kind of the conundrum that we were all in. Microbiology, unfortunately, had not kept the same pace as drug development. So drug development was just so far ahead that you kept wanting to say to on the microbiology side, just help us to be more rapid, help us to quickly identify what bacteria we're dealing with, so we can give someone the right drug. And then and not to bash the industry, but again, some companies within the pharma world, unfortunately, were in some cases putting profit over patients. I'm glad to say that from a Merck perspective, and I retired from Merck in 2020. They had an ethos, a way of approaching the customers and patients, that if you took care of the patient, you never had to worry about profit. Just take care of the patient. And that sort of drove a different type of behavior. It wasn't all about a sale. It was more about, were we doing the best for the patient? And were we helping our physicians to do the best they could be for the patient? So that it might sound, that I'm sort of too positive towards Merck, but that really was how they approached specifically the antibiotic world. So that's how it all came about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, I mean, I spent some time with Becton Dickinson in my career as well. And I remember very clearly having these conversations. Look, there are two ways that you could sort of test like what's causing, the infection or whatever. You can more or less regrow whatever the infection is. And based on that growth, and we would know, this is what that is. Or you could spend more money and go do a molecular test. And very clearly, the healthcare system that we have in the United States, at least, would make that decision that, hey, look, we don't want to spend, the money oftentimes to go do the more expensive test whenever a cheaper test might do, if the patient, is suffering but not going to die, I guess is the best way that I would put it. And again, not the best answer for this particular problem. I mean, there could be things that all of a sudden, by the time that you do get the answer back, now all of a sudden it's morphed into something else, or causing even greater problems for the patient. So it is an overall challenge whenever it comes to our healthcare system and the way it views things, let alone the vendor, like you said, the company itself. Has to make some very clear decisions about what they want to do.
No, quite right. And I think if you think about bacterial infections, they're immediate. They're not something that you can say, just hang on, let's just take a couple of days to work out what you have, because as you said, by then the patient could be in serious trouble. And I guess physicians at the coalface, at the bedside, are asking them to wait until we could have a definitive answer. It's really not really possible, because that's not it's not what they signed up to do. They signed up to treat and to help the patient. So I think now, as I'm sure more and more we're getting really rapid diagnostics. We're getting to a point where by the time the second dose of whatever you've given the patient empirically is due, pretty much what that patient has. And that's sort of really only been, I would say, probably the last 2 or 3 years that that's sort of come about, which has made life a lot easier. But at the same time, you're still having very often to choose an initial choice, an empiric choice, that probably 50% of the time is probably wrong. And that's where the sort of collateral damage, specifically in hospitals, begins. We can talk about that later on.
Yeah. Yeah. I oftentimes, I mean, to go to that point really quickly, oftentimes, you hear about in other countries or in other places that there are times whenever people overdose antibiotics and things like that, which brought about, a whole other series of problems as well, that, now all of a sudden, you have, resistant strains of bacteria now, that won't react at all to the antibiotics that we have. And having visited one of those countries and gotten very sick at one point, I walked away with, I remember Googling all these things whenever I felt a little bit better. And one of the drugs was like a drug for anthrax. but I wasn't exposed to anthrax. I had a severe fever, and they were trying to figure out why. But one of the things I walked away with was, something that they used to treat anthrax. So yeah, for sure, that can be a problem as well.
Yep. I mean, multi-drug resistance, the hotbed of multi-drug resistance in the United States, of course, is New York. And it's almost, some of these bacteria are almost endemic to the city at the moment. And it's the reason why, back in our Merck days, we actually built if you like, a virtual registry of these multi-drug resistant bugs. And most of that was brought in. It
Mhm.
came from outside into New York, which is just a hotbed because there's just so many thousands, millions of people traveling through that city. Um, it's pretty scary. Things like Candida auris, to this day, most hospitals in the city have an issue with Candida auris. And not to be an alarmist, but that's something that you need to take pretty seriously, and I'm sure the hospital systems do. But it would be very different in Colorado or Florida than it would be in New York City.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for that. So, in your career, right, in all the different experiences that you have had, there had to have been key inflection points along the way. If you were to lay out for us, what were those? What were some of those key moments you felt like in your career that led you to this very point where you're now at DoseMe?
Yeah, I think it really started around about, my progression in Merck got to a point that in 2026, I moved to the United States. And one of the primary reasons for that move was that Merck was looking to change its commercial model. It realized that the days of sending, thousands of representatives into hospitals and doctors' rooms were really rapidly coming to an end. And there had to be another way. I think that, obviously, you fast forward to 2021 and 2022, we saw that real impact that COVID had on stopping representatives from actually going to hospitals. And Merck, back in 2006, were already aware that that was going to happen. And then, what did it look like? So some of what, even what we touched on a little earlier around, it's it's important that you give longevity to the great medications that you bring to market. And the more inappropriately you market those medications, the worse the outcome in the end. The drug either doesn't last very long because it builds up resistance, or you find out that the drug is actually causing sort of side effects and toxicities that you didn't realize were going to happen because of its overuse. So we really embarked on trying to ensure that we were generating enough data to help real world data. Clinical trial data is one thing, and in terms of precision medicine and personalized medicine, clinical trials do not reflect real world data. I'm sure we all know that. But so Merck went on a very specific path of saying we need to develop and generate real world data that we can show physicians that what they're choosing is the right thing to choose based on real world evidence. And that is the sort of path we took, and we slowly started to change the way we approach the market. So we stopped sending the thousands of representatives and instead started to have more peer-to-peer conversations. So that was the first inflection point. I found that that sort of changed the way that I started to think about what's important for patients. Because once you see that, you realize that, you know uh, the industry is morphing. It was starting to regulate itself, and it regulated itself in such a way to say data is the most important thing. Yes, generic companies are a different story, but when it comes to the big ethical pharma companies that are bringing new products to market, you had to believe that this was right. This felt good. I think that, as I recall back in that time, there was some sort of poll done that sort of asked people how they rated tobacco companies versus pharmaceutical companies. And I think back in the day, many people felt that there was no difference, which was scary. It was something as, if you were working for a big pharmaceutical company, that's the last thing you wanted to hear, that Philip Morris was, more admired than Glaxo or
Yeah.
Merck.
Right.
Really?
Right.
That was certainly one. I think the next sort of big inflection moment for me was a move to Europe. I was the head of infectious disease, the commercial part of infectious disease for the whole of Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Canada. Um, and it was then that we started to look and say, how do we actually market this? Because how do we market these drugs, from hepatitis, HIV, antibiotics, all of these things? The marketing needs to change. It's not about bringing out what you had from your clinical studies and things like that. You had to help physicians to make the most appropriate choice for the patient that was in front of them. And sometimes that was not our drug. And we had to demonstrate uh, that was okay. Because when you did that, you built the kind of trust with the clinicians and at that time the sort of key opinion leaders realized that we weren't in it to try and sell the most antibiotics we could. We were actually in it to say, please consider the patient that's sitting in front of you. There's different criteria that this patient has, from ethnicity to weight to age to all the different things. And the drugs that we use are going to respond differently depending on those specific criteria. And of course, blood work and things like tests and diagnostics that are done. PGX, pharmacogenomics, is now becoming, I'm not yet probably mainstream, but it's sort of certainly becoming something that people are starting to realize is important in terms of matching people and drugs. It's not the only thing. I think PGX is a piece of that, but it's in terms of the continuum of ensuring a patient is getting the right care. Diagnostics, PGX, certainly a very, very important part of that. So I think that started to change the way I looked at how we would market. It changed my perception of um, drugs and what the pharma companies had been doing in the past versus what we could do in the future by ensuring we were getting it to the right patient at the right time. I think then one of the things that we did at Merck at the time, we had acquired a company called Schering-Plough, and one of the biggest organizations outside of the United States for Schering-Plough and Merck was the country of Russia. And for a period of time, I spent actually 2 years actually in operations in Russia. And that is, without a doubt, the cauldron of infectious disease, oncology, and infertility. Those are the three big things. The socioeconomics of Russia is just quite amazing, and again brought something new into the way I looked at things, because I realized for the first time that um, governments sometimes have a different priorities at hand, and sometimes that doesn't marry up with the health of the population.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be very careful here. So the 2 years and 8 months, 5 days, 3 hours I spent.
Yeah.
Was certainly one of the. It was one of the most eye-opening. It was one of the most educational. It was a moment of true reflection on how the industry could sort of go and help and make sure that we were getting medicines to people, um, regardless of corruption, regardless of economics, regardless of social issues. We could make it, get it done, and we could follow the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the process. That's would be it was the key piece for Merck's involvement in Russia itself. And then finally coming back to the US in 2012, and heading up the sort of infectious disease team, global marketing leader. That's when antimicrobial stewardship in my world really became something that we embraced. At its core, antimicrobial stewardship is all about the right patient, the right dose, the right drug at the right time. And if you get that all right, the patient outcome is fantastic. the impact on the ecology of a country or a hospital is minimized, and you've done the right thing. And so, antimicrobial stewardship, or ASP, depending which acronym you use, became something that Merck really took to heart. They realized that this was something that, if they did this properly, there would be positive benefits from a drug perspective. Primarily because if you follow stewardship principles, drugs with the best coverage, drugs that had the best tolerability and toxicity profiles, and drugs with the best bacterial coverage would most often succeed. So there was obviously a view to that, but Merck went about antimicrobial stewardship in a very profound way. And as we can talk about that in South Africa and India. That sort of continuum of care is it's sometimes so disappointing, because some of those lower or middle to lower income markets, the ones that really need stewardship programs, are the ones that didn't have the resource available to them to actually get stewardship programs in place. And that's where the industry, with many academics from the United States, put programs in place, both in India, South Africa, Brazil, Colombia. Dr. Deborah Goff out of Ohio State, one of those. So it was, I think that's sort of a sort of moment that, from what I just said, dosing became something that was very important to me. I realized, specifically for narrow therapeutic index antibiotics, if you continue to just use dosing, or trough-based dosing, the chances of you actually getting the right dose into that patient were probably less than 10%. It's just, and I think, there's more and more data has been published on this. Probably in the last 12 months, probably more than I've ever seen. But now at ECMED, we just published, using our own in-house data, of nearly 40,000 doses, which demonstrated that, as I just said, trough-based dosing did not help to achieve efficacy or safety in the patient the same way as area under the curve, AUC dosing. AUC dosing got that patient to the level of the drug that was absolutely at its peak for efficacy, and at the same time didn't push them into that area where they get toxicities or adverse events. So those are what I would say were the sort of key moments in my career thus far. As I said, I left Merck having already now met the team from DoseMe. And DoseMe, we had done some diligence here in the US. There were 2 or 3 competitors in the space, and DoseMe just had the most intuitive front end that if any clinician could use DoseMe and know what to do next. It wasn't complicated. Very often, some of the dosing, Bayesian dosing specifically, front ends were extremely complicated, and you literally had to be a PhD in pharmacology to know how to use it. That's not good for me, because when I look at that, I'm done. I have no idea what's going on. But when I looked at the DoseMe front end, I said, well, yeah, I know enough to probably be able to populate what needs to be populated here to get the right dose. So that was what really excited me at the time about DoseMe. And it's so funny that's, I got called in by Merck's chief strategy officer one day. His name was Jay Galliotta. And he said, hey, this antimicrobial stewardship thing, I really like it. It really is. It's good for our company. It's good for our antibiotics. And we should try to sort of build a business around that. And I said, yeah, it's a great idea. You should go and do that, Jay. He said, no, you should go and do that. And so that's how ILUM actually was created. It was the first sort of organic company that was built within Merck that did not generate income for using drugs and vaccines. It was a software that sort of was a clinical decision support software that was helping physicians at the bedside make the right decisions based on antimicrobial stewardship principles. And then we were looking for a DoseMe to help us. I always, in my mind, I have an analogy. The clinician at the bedside, he sees that patient, he understands, he takes, vitals. This patient has probably got an infection. He does some diagnostics. He might even do some pharmacogenomics. He's doing all the things for him to make a choice about the right drug.
Right.
And it's like going to a football game. What he's doing is he's getting himself to the stadium. And when he makes that choice on that drug, he's arrived at the stadium. But if he now wants to make sure that the drug is used correctly, he has to use therapeutic drug monitoring or precise dosing. And that's what gets him to his seat inside the stadium. So that last mile, that dosing piece, is as important as the many miles it took to get to the point where he prescribed drug A. And specifically, I'm saying this for injectable antibiotics or narrow therapeutic antibiotics. It's not the same for oral antibiotics. But in this case, I'm talking critically ill patients in a hospital.
So if it's from the standpoint of DoseMe, describe to me a little bit more, if I didn't know anything about DoseMe, just for anybody that is listening or watching, what specifically is it and how does it work and things like that? How do care providers now get it?
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about what it is. So DoseMe is effectively therapeutic drug monitoring, and it's particularly area under the curve for antibiotics, and in particular vancomycin. So vancomycin is currently on the is in the guidelines here in the US. It says use AUC, area under the curve, and Bayesian is one of those opportunities to get there. It's population-based modeling. It's looking at a number of key criteria from age, ethnicity, weight, circumference, all of those type of things, plus serum creatinine and other markers, blood markers that we add into a Bayesian statistical model that will then say, for this patient, the correct dose, you have a number of options, which whether you want one compartment or two compartment dosing, but for this particular patient, this is how many milligrams you should be using in an infusion over this much time. So it gives the clinician very precise information about what dose and for how long and how many times. So that's what we do. We take away all the so we have a web-based model which allows the clinician to input some of this information themselves, or we have an integrated model which is inside the electronic medical records, Epic or Cerner, and it will take that information directly from the electronic medical record and populate the sort of, if you like, the algorithms. And then the answer comes forth. Now, it's all good and well getting those answers, but if you don't know how to use it, if you don't know how to interpret it, and that's where the interpretation comes in as well. So that's basically what it does. We have an analytics program that consistently runs in the background to show what's happening with those patients. So every time the patient gets another dose, is that correct? What is it? What is the blood level? The most important thing is, let's keep vancomycin as the example. If you're using trough-based dosing for vancomycin, you need to take blood levels probably every 12 to 24 hours. If you're using Bayesian dosing, you take one blood level, you don't take another one. So you're saving on nursing time, you're saving on pharmacy time, and you're getting to your your correct dose, your precise dose, quicker than you would do with a trough-based dosing methodology, which is what we've used for 30, 40, 50 years. So that's how we've dosed vancomycin. It's quite funny. If you tried to register vancomycin based on the current vancomycin package insert and dosing today, you probably would not be able to register that drug.
Wow. So in terms of the places that DoseMe is currently, excuse me, DoseMeRx is the product, and I keep sort of missing that as well. That so for DoseMeRx, where is it and where can it be found?
So it's actually inside the electronic medical record. It's normally used by clinical pharmacists here in
Mhm.
the US. There's in the US is very specific this way, by the way. Many other countries do not have clinical pharmacists, but a physician will, as I say, get to the stadium. When he got to the stadium, he said, "This patient needs vancomycin." It's then the clinical pharmacist that then needs to say, all right, let's get that patient into the seat. Here is the dosing that we're going to use for this patient, because this patient is different to the patient next door to him. So the dosing will be different. So it's actually inside the medical record, if that's how you like it integrated. Some smaller satellite hospitals or urgent cares like to be able to sort of put the information in themselves quickly so that they can get a result. All of the patient information is securely housed. It's a cloud-based product, so you can always go back and reference and make sure that you have everything that you need. So that's how it lives in the hospital environment in the US, either through cloud-based input from the clinician or automatically inputted through the electronic medical record. I'm not
Very
sure if I've
good.
answered your question there,
Yeah.
Don, but have I?
Yeah, yeah. So I was more or less, trying to understand it. Am I ever going to walk into a hospital and all of a sudden see Dose Me RX somewhere? And the real answer is primarily no, right? I mean, it's embedded somewhere inside of Cerner or Epic. I hear that very clearly, and then also in some cases it's more standalone. And again, I'm probably not going to see it anyway as a patient because they're going to do it outside of the room, go figure out what the dose is with a clinical pharmacist, and then come back, right? So,
Correct. There are circumstances where, obviously, where the clinician is taking what might be doing around, where they have their Epic or Cerner open at the bedside, where they will pull out information and see and order from the bedside.
mhm.
Um, Anything that they do from there automatically gets put back into the electronic medical record, so it's complete. It's always updated, so no one makes an error. You don't want to accidentally have somebody prescribe the same drug twice. So those things, we make sure is, from a safety perspective, and then from a data and data security perspective, DoseMe is also the only high trust uh, certified platform, which is unique. High trust is it demonstrates to our customers that we respect their data. That's really what you're doing with high trust.
Yeah, yeah. It's all about focusing on the data privacy and making sure that you're maintaining, the right level of focus there. I would
Right.
imagine, given your global experience, right, that at times it's got to come in handy, both with just your perspective in terms of how things operate both inside of the U.S. and outside, but also does it help you tailor your strategies to meet more local needs for different healthcare settings?
Yeah, absolutely. And I sort of brushed on that a little bit in the previous discussion, but as I said, the US it's great to work with clinical pharmacists. They understand that they've been taught how to do dosing correctly. Now, outside of the US, this is all left to the physician, and
Mhm.
I would say it's almost an impossible task. You can't be a diagnostician. Uh, you can't know everything that needs to be known about the disease and pick the drug and then also know how to dose it. When we know, specifically for antibiotics, injectable antibiotics, how difficult that dosing is. Cefepime, vancomycin, daptomycin, all of these drugs, it's not one size fits all. They are all have to be tweaked and tinkered in order to give the right dose to the patient that's sitting in front of you, based on so many things. It's impossible for that physician to know all of those answers. Yes, speaking to many physicians, they say, yeah, we hear you, Paul, but we've been in medicine for 30 years. I know how to dose vancomycin, and I say, well, that might be the case, and I'm sure that you're different to everybody else. But I do want to highlight that vancomycin, in about 5 to 7% of patients, causes severe kidney injury, and that hasn't changed over the years. That 5 to 7% has been there over and over again. And why is that? Is because of trough-based dosing. Your chances for toxicity are just elevated. And think of the cost of a kidney injury. It's something that if you can avoid it, you should. And that's why I think in the US, roles like PharmD really are good for patients. It's something that's tremendously valuable. And that's, to your point, yes. When I go and we sell in Europe, we're selling to a different customer. We're not selling to a pharmacy. We're selling to a physician more often. Certainly, we have PhDs that are trying to build out their own models to help physicians to do things, but those are not models that are transferable easily. They can't be just put into the workflow. Yes, let me just put this information in and get an answer. That doesn't work like that. So it does help that over my years at Merck, I saw the differences, first of all, in socioeconomics, but also in the customer. Who's really the customer, and why are they different in one country to another country? And how do you address them? Because you don't address a physician the same way that you address a clinician or a pharmacist. It's a different, the way they think and what's important to them is different. So yes, it's been tremendously valuable knowing that.
Yeah, it's such an important perspective, and I just think about my own global experience that, and it's vastly not as deep as yours. So, but yeah, at the same time, whenever I sort of have met physicians in other countries and been in hospitals in other countries, you start to see the differences and feel the differences. And oftentimes, I would also stress, because I've said this before on the show as well, the oftentimes you hear these rumors that there's these disparities are just so awful for the patients that are in different countries, and that is the case in certain instances, but it's not the case in all. So
Yeah,
you can't apply some sort of flat rate approach to it. You have to be somebody that really does understand from the perspective of the person that's going to wind up with the drugs as well.
absolutely. Yeah.
So could you share the greatest piece of leadership advice that you've ever received?
I thought about this for quite a while because I've been extremely fortunate in my life. I've just had, many truly great leaders that I've worked for, directly or indirectly. And I think probably the things that sort of um, I've heard consistently from many of those leaders is the importance of sort of surrounding yourself with people that have different and variable skills to yourself. That's the first thing. But then the second thing is get out of the way and let them do what they're good at. That I've seen, too many times in corporate world where managers, because I wouldn't call them leaders, they have great skills around them, but feel that they still have to control everything, as opposed to letting people do their jobs. And I've always tried to sort of live by that. I live by that with DoseMe. We surrounded with exceptionally intelligent people that have vast skills, and I just get out of the way and let them do what they're good at.
Also good. All right. And what inspires you?
Yeah, I think the inspiration piece is every day. I think about how can we use technology to improve patient outcomes. What do we have at DoseMe in this particular case that we could do more of? What could we add to the existing product sort of makeup and stack that would make life easier for the physician, that would have a better outcome for the patient? All of these things are the things that sort of really inspire me every day to sort of wake up and say, come on, there's got to be something we can add. And for me, at the moment, that's really pharmacogenomics. I think pharmacogenomics is a key aspect of patient care that will become mainstream in the not too distant future.
Yeah, also true. What concerns you?
My biggest concern is probably the current insurance and payer systems. They are built on actuarial science. Actuarial science looks to the past to predict the future. If that's what you're doing as a business model, you're in trouble because the future is not going to look anything like the past. In fact, it's already changed dramatically. They need to look at how technology is improving patient outcomes, and how are they going to sort of fund or use that technology to improve the way that people are paid for care. That's clearly something that concerns me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Last question. What excites you?
I think with the most important thing, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, Project Artemis from the FDA, that is something that really excites me, and why it's the first of real conversation that the FDA is having with industry to say, you know what, we're not going to let you have one dose fits all. It's not what the world looks like going forward. You need to have the right dose for the right patient at the right time. And 250 milligrams for you, Don, is not 250 milligrams for me, based on so many different things. So that's what excites me. That conversation has begun. I think when we talk about precision dosing and precision medicine, I think there's one more important aspect, and that's personalized medicine. Personalized medicine is really what we're aiming to get to. It's more than precision. It's really about that individual. What genetics does he have, or she have? What the drugs that you're wanting to give? What genes are involved with that, and therefore do they match? And then do they match for that particular disease? And then what is the dose? So that was great conversation. That's super exciting for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And Paul Edwards, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and telling us about RX and overall about your journey that led you to the company as well. I mean, very interesting journey. And I feel like it's such an important thing to have, for our future in terms of, ensuring that we are appropriately treating the drugs that we have with the respect that they deserve.
Absolutely. Well said, Don.
Thank you so much.